Music therapy and music as a bridge to the soul. Dr. Deepak Chopra, it is a true privilege and honor for you to be here with us. If I could ask Nisschal Zaveri and band to join us on stage. Dr. Chopra, quoting from the start of your article, Music is a Bridge to the Soul. It is the one reliable bridge to the soul in every culture. But ancient India has made a specialty of it. One such ancient musical form is that of the Ghazal. We will start with the Ghazal and Thumri performance by Mr. Nisschal Zaveri. Dr. Chopra, before Nisschal starts his performance, do you have any words to say to Nisschal?
Well, I'm looking forward to the performance. Enlighten the world. Bring joy.
Thank you so much. So I have today performing with me Ashish Biswas ji on tabla and Rohan Prasanna on sarod. So I'm going to start with an original composition in rag Miya Malhar. So the notes of this rag are not actually there on the harmonium, because in our Indian classical music there are semitones which the harmonium cannot reproduce. This is playing a knee, but it's not the same knee as what we are singing. कभी कहा न किसी से तेरे फसाने को, कभी कहा न किसी से तेरे फसाने को, कभी कहा न किसी से तेरे फसाने को, न जाने कैसे खबर हो गई ज़माने को, कभी कहा न न किसी से तेरे फसाने को। जैसे सबको पता चल गया है कि डॉक्टर चोपड़ा यहाँ आए हुए हैं। सुना है गैर की महफिल में तुम न जाओगे। सुना है गैर की महफिल में तुम न जाओगे। सुना है गैर की महफिल में तुम न जाओगे। कहो तो आज सजा लूं गरीब खाने को। कहो तो आज सजा लूं गरीब खाने को। न जाने कैसे खबर हो गई ज़माने को। कभी कहा न किसी से तेरे फसाने को। ने नि सा 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 नि सा रे 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 सा नि सा रे नि नि मा प नि ध नि सा नि ध नि सा नि ध नि सा। कभी कहा न किसी से। दबा के कब्र में, दबा के कब्र में सब चल दिए दुआ न सलाम। दबा के कब्र में सब चल दिए दुआ न सलाम। दबा के कब्र में सब चल दिए दुआ न सलाम। जरा सी देर में क्या हो गया ज़माने को। जरा सी देर में क्या हो गया ज़माने को ज़रा सी देर में क्या हो गया ज़माने को कभी कहा न किसी से तेरे फसाने को कभी कहा न किसी से तेरे फसाने को न जाने कैसे खबर हो गई ज़माने को कभी कहा न किसी से तेरे फसाने को ओ, ओ, शुक्रिया, थैंक यू। एक ठुमरी पेश करता हूँ। ने सर ग मा ग रे पा मगर गर ने पने सारे मगर ने रे सा रे मा पा धा पा रे ने धा पा धा मगर रे पा मगर गर ने पने सर मगर गर ने मा पने ने सा। This is in Rag Desh. हो परदेसी परदेसी बालम अब के सावन घर घर जा रे घर आ जा रे पर्दे से बालम मैं अकेले अकेले मोहे डर लागे मोहे डर लागे अब के सावन घर आजा घर आजा घर आजा घर आजा घर घर आजा रे घर आजा रे सावन घर आजा रे अब के सावन घर निदानी पद मा पग गम प मगर रे प मगर सने मापने मापने ने सर गम गर प मगर गर ने सा सावन घर आजा रे अब के सावन घर ओ कगवा ओ कगवा उड़ जाइयो ले जाइयो संदेशवा ले जाइयो संदेशवा संदेशवा ओ कगवा उड़े जाइयो ले जाइयो संदेशवा तेरी सोने से चोंच मड़ूंगी पंख पे लिख दूंगी रे बालम अब के सावन घर आजा अब के सावन घर आजा अब के सावन घर आजा आजा घर आजा रे अब के सावन घर आजा सा नि द प नि नि द प म द म प द प म द प म नि द प द द प द प प ग म प म ग म ग रे ग रे ग रे सा नि रे सा नि रे सा नि रे सा अब के सावन घर आजा रे म प नि सा 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 प सा नि रे सा नि द नि नि द नि द प म प म प म प नि नि द प म प सा नि द प नि नि द प म प ग म प म ग म ग रे सा नि रे सा नि प नि सा प नि सा प नि सा नि सा अब के सावन घर आजा अब के सावन घर आजा मम मम प प प प प मम मम प प प प प प प म प द प प प द द प द प प द द नि नि द नि द प नि नि द नि द प सा प द म प म ग रे प द म प म ग रे प द म प प म ग रे मम ग रे ग रे सब के सावन घर आजा अब के सावन घर आजा के सावन घर आजा अब के सावन घर अब के सावन घर अब के सावन घर आजा रे आजा अब के सावन घर आजा रे ने सा गा गर माग गर गर साने पानी सागर गर साने निर साने मापने मापने गा गा मापने गा मापने सागर गर साने ने सा This is Thumri by बड़े गुलाम अली खां साहब. कैसे bayaoon Radhe 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 कन्हैया तोरा कन्हैया तोरा कन्हैया तोरा कारा कैसे bayaoon Radhe कैसे bayaoon Radhe कन्हैया तोरा कारा कन्हैया तोरा कारा कन्हैया तोरा तोरा कारा कैसे bayaoon Radhe कैसे bayaoon Radhe मैं कैसे bayaoon Radhe कारा तोरा कन्हैया कारा 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 तोरा कन्हैया कारा 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 कन्हैया तोरा कारा मैं कैसे bayaoon Radhe कैसे bayaoon Radhe मैं कैसे bayaoon Radhe कन्हैया तोरा तोरा का कारा कन्हैया तोरा कारा bayaoon Radhe, kaise bayaoon Radhe, kaise bayaoon, kaise bayaoon, kaise bayaoon Radhe. शुक्रिया। इसी राग में एक जगजीत सिंह साहब की गज़ल है। झुकी झुकी सी नज़र, झुकी झुकी सी नज़र, झुकी झुकी सी नज़र, झुकी झुकी सी नज़र, बेकरार है कि नहीं, दबा दबा सा सही, दिल में प्यार है कि नहीं, झुकी झुकी सी नज़र, बेकरार है कि नहीं, दबा दबा सा सही। तेरी उम्मीद पे ठुकरा रहा हूँ दुनिया को। डॉक्टर चोपड़ा डिटैचमेंट की बातें करते हैं और यहाँ पूरा ही ऑपोजिट जा रहे हैं। तेरी उम्मीद पे ठुकरा रहा हूँ दुनिया को, तुझे भी अपने पे, तुझे भी अपने पे एतबार है कि नहीं, तुझे भी अपने पे एतबार है कि नहीं, दबा दबा सा सही, दिल में प्यार है कि नहीं, झुकी झुकी सी नज़र, झुकी झुकी सी नज़र, झुकी झुकी सी नज़र। Thank you so much. We have time? One more? I'd like to end with one of my own compositions. This is in Rag Charu Kisi, written by Rajendranath Revar. आईना सामने रखोगे तो याद आऊंगा। आईना सामने रखोगे तो याद आऊंगा। आईना सामने रखोगे तो याद आऊंगा। अपनी जुल्फों को सवारोगे तो याद आऊंगा। आईना सामने रखोगे तो याद आऊंगा। सरगमगा गरगमगा पमदपा निदपमगा सनिद निदपम पदप निदपम दपमग रे ग सरे गम पमग मग रे ग रे सनिद नि सा धनि सा धनि सा। आईना सामने भूल जाना मुझे आसान नहीं है इतना। भूल जाना मुझे आसान नहीं है इतना। भूल जाना मुझे आसान नहीं है इतना। जब मुझे भूलना चाहोगे तो याद आऊंगा। जब मुझे भूलना चाहोगे तो याद आऊंगा आईना सामने रखोगे तो याद आऊंगा निदा 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 प म प प ग म म रे ग ग स रे रे नि सा नि नि सा रे ग म प द नि सा नि द प म प द प म प ग म प म ग म ग रे ग रे सा नि द नि सा रे ग म प द नि सा सा रे ग रे सा नि सा द नि नि द नि द प म प द प द म प ग म प म ग म ग रे सा नि सा आईना सामने जिनमें मिल जाते थे हम तुम कभी आते जाते जिनमें मिल जाते थे हम तुम कभी आते जाते जब भी उन गलियों से गुजरोगे तो याद आऊंगा जब भी उन गलियों से गुजरोगे तो याद आऊंगा अपनी जुल्फों को सवारोगे तो याद आऊंगा अपनी जुल्फों को सवारोगे तो याद आऊंगा आईना सामने रखोगे तो याद आऊंगा आईना सामने रखोगे तो याद आऊंगा आईना सामने रखोगे तो याद आऊंगा अपनी जुल्फों को सवारोगे तो याद आऊंगा आईना सामने आईना सामने आईना सामने बहुत शुक्रिया थैंक यू सो मच थैंक यू अगेन डॉक्टर चोपड़ा आशीष विश्वास जी रोहन प्रसन्ना Sohail who's doing the sound and Tushar and his team who are clicking these wonderful photographs. Thank you so much.
Dr. Chopra, a teacher to us all. We are so grateful and humbled by your presence today. Thank you. Under the theme music therapy and music as a bridge to the soul, I wanted to start with a discussion about how music acts like a bridge to the brain and how this is specifically evident with Alzheimer's patients.
So before I answer that question, anything I say is going to be an anticlimax after that extraordinary performance. Thank you for the experience. To Nisschal and his wonderful colleagues, and it's also a great pleasure to have Professor Dinesh Singh and Sir Chopra here. royal family and the Zaveri family and all of you. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak and share some ideas with you. So before I answer your question, let me just say that I grew up in Delhi and in high school years, very strongly influenced by Nizamuddin Aulia and the mushairas that used to take place all night with great poets and great musicians. And then I lost contact with music altogether. And when I was in training in residency, it was a very traumatic time. The Vietnam War was coming to an end. But I was working at a Veterans Administration hospital where you have a lot of what is called now post-traumatic stress disorder, but we used to call it shell shock. And there were a lot of patients with dementia who were actually Alzheimer's, dementia, broad spectrum of mental disorders. And a lot of them were World War II veterans at that time, older people in their 70s, in their 80s, but they'd been veterans in the Second World War. And some of them were very severely demented. And one day, by accident, there was some music that was being played that was very popular in the 40s and the 30s in the West. And suddenly we saw these patients blossom. They not only started singing along, but their memories came back. And then it was much later that we discovered that even in Alzheimer's and severe dementia, musical memory does not go away. Linguistic long-term memory might go away. Short-term memory might go away. It's mostly short-term, but musical memory doesn't go away. And music is a very powerful way to, through memory activation, to activate what we call neuroplasticity. Neural networks start to reinforce different pathways. So now we know that there's something called neurogenesis, which means the actually generation of new neurons, but also neuroplasticity in the sense of what we call synaptogenesis. So synapses between neurons, they start to get activated. Not only do you have new neurons being generated, but the connections between neurons is also affected through music. So I started kind of looking into the history of music, and Professor Dinesh Singh is here. I think he'll agree that mathematics and music actually transcend language in the ordinary sense. So now these days with AI we have multiple languages: biological language, mathematical language, musical language, the language of physics, and all of that is coming together to create what we call superintelligence. But if you ask mathematicians and musicians, where does music exist and where does math exist, and why are they so unreasonably effective in creating joy and transcendence? You know, take you beyond thought and bring you to the present moment. When you're listening to music, we were listening to music, you're not thinking of the end. You're not even thinking of the beginning. You're just there in that moment. And there's something very interesting that happens in that the different people who are in this group, like your two companions, they're in a way non-locally entangled. Non-locally entangled means they're communing with each other without communicating with each other. It's when communication is this level, I have to speak to you, and there's distance in space-time. But what we call communion, which is a sacred experience, is not in space-time. They are communing with each other without actually communicating with each other. And this communion is synchronistic. It's unmediated. There's no medium of exchange. It's unmitigated. The robustness of the communion doesn't diminish with distance in space-time. And it's instantaneous. There's no time involved. And when you look at the nature of the universe, this is what it is. We call it universe, one song. Universe, one song. And if you look at our own biology, it is actually part of the symphony of the universe. So we have in our biology several rhythms. The first is the circadian rhythm, as the earth moves on its own axis. The second rhythm is what we call the seasonal rhythm, as the earth goes around the sun. The third is gravitational rhythms, the effect of the sun, moon, and the cosmos on the oceans, but we have an ocean inside us. 70% of your body is the ocean. And once upon a time, we, in our evolutionary history, were part of that. And when we came to land, we brought the ocean with us. So we have gravitational rhythms. And then we also have lunar rhythms. There are rhythms that correspond in our body as biological rhythms to the movement of the moon, earth, and sun in relationship to each other. And our biology actually tunes into all these rhythms when it's in perfect health. So perfect health is the total synchronization of our biological rhythms with universal rhythms. And the only rhythm that medical science is paying attention to right now is what we call the circadian rhythm, the cycle of the day and the night. And that's because everybody is familiar with jet lag. Jet lag is disruption of the circadian rhythm. But these rhythms are actually correlated with all the cosmic rhythms. And our biology is dancing to this, even though we can't consciously hear the tune. And what would be considered perfect symmetry is both math and music. And if you ask experts, where does this exist? They say it's platonic. It's not a human creation. It's actually a creation of the cosmos, both math and music. And there's symmetry. And when that symmetry breaks, then you have entropy. And that entropy in our biology is what we call disease. So I got very interested in music therapy because of my experience with the veterans. And then later, when I was doing neuroendocrinology, we were studying the molecules of emotion, serotonin, opiates, oxytocin, dopamine. There's also actually a peptide now in the brain that scientists call anandamide. So it's the protein, the peptide that's released in the brain when you experience what we call ananda, the musical experience of joy. And that anandamide and these opiates are actually immunomodulators. They modulate and fine-tune the immune system. So if you give somebody Narcan is a narcotic antagonist. So if somebody overdoses on heroin, for example, or opiates, brought to the emergency room, you give them Narcan, and it blocks the receptor, and people recover. But if somebody, we enjoyed this music right now, if we gave people Narcan before they listen to this music, they would lose their enjoyment of the music, which means music actually generates these peptides, including anandamide, which fine-tune the immune system. And it's undervalued as a therapy at the moment. And of course, music has cultural differences. The ragas in particular, he said this is an evening raga. So ragas in particular look at timing, they look at season, and they look at mood, bhava, and the rasa that you imbue that changes everything, bhava. And the ultimate goal is tune into the cosmos. And what we call entropy is the breaking of that cosmos into what we call, it's called symmetry breaking. And that's the mechanism through which currently science understands how the singularity, which is the confluence of space-time, energy, information, matter, all exist as pure potential in the singularity, whatever you want to call it, Brahman, God, whatever, black hole, singularity, doesn't matter. But when that breaks the symmetry, then the cosmos emerges. And that's actually the origin of the expression Nada Brahman. Brahman vibrates as Brahmand, but vibrates both mathematically and musically.
Very interesting. You had cited how love and music point beyond these everyday experiences, and you just spoke to that a little bit. But do you believe that music has the ability to do that?
Well, didn't Shakespeare say, if music be the language of love, then play on? And Shakespeare also said, the man that hath no music in himself is fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils. The motions of his spirit are as dark as Erebus. Let no such man be trusted. So yes, love, love not as a mere emotion, but love as the ultimate truth at the heart of creation is music. Beauty, love, music, joy go together. When Tagore had a beautiful expression. He said, when I see beauty, I know it as truth, and it is also love. Love not as a mere sentiment, but the ultimate truth at the heart of creation.
The discourse of creation as vibrations, and how this gives people possible keys to experiences. That's relevant in music and other parts of the brain and music therapy?
Yes, I think the key to understand is that in creation, at least as we understand it through Indian wisdom traditions, there is, and again I'm speaking metaphorically right now, there's Shiva and Shakti, or Purusha and Prakriti. So Purusha is pure consciousness, the perfect symmetry. And then as it vibrates, we call it vritti. Vritti is fluctuation. And that fluctuation we experience as sensations. Every sensation in the body is a fluctuation, but also a sense perception, sound, touch, sight, taste, smell. These are vibrations of consciousness. And then they evoke images in our consciousness. You're listening to this music, you have an image. When you were saying the last ghazal, particularly Aaeena mein, jab dekhta hu to aapko yaad aa jayega. That's an emotion, but that's also an image that is evoked. So sensations, sense perceptions, images, feelings, emotions, and thoughts are entangled. Entangled means they are inseparable. And these are called vrittis. And if you, in Sankhya philosophy, in the wisdom traditions of India, particularly in Shiva Sutras, these vrittis create the experience of existence. So there's existence, which is pure consciousness, infinite possibilities, perfect symmetry, perfect equilibrium, samadhi, whatever you want to call it. But when that breaks, then there's creation. That's the Shakti that emerges, whether you call it Shakti, fluctuations, sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. And if they are perfectly entangled, Then they move in the direction of empathy, which means you feel what other people feel. They evoke compassion, which means the desire to alleviate suffering. That creates joy and ultimately results in love as the healer. Now, scientifically speaking, you asked about the brain, and this is not well known, but it's becoming well known. So when they say love is the ultimate healer, we used to think of it as metaphorically. But there's a part of your brain, and it's called the limbic brain, the emotional brain. So we have three brains: the cortical brain, which is the intellectual brain, which is presumably what we're using right now to have this conversation. Then there's the emotional brain. And then there's a reptilian brain. The emotional brain is only found in mammals. It's not found in reptiles. And the emotional brain, if it develops in a way that is evolutionary, when a baby or a child gets attention, which means is heard, affection, loved, appreciation, is noticed for its uniqueness, and child gets total acceptance, then that evolution of emotions is such that it creates a phenomenon in the brain called limbic resonance. And now we find that if there's a healer and a person being healed, if the healer or the physicians don't have time, but if they had the time, if a patient is cared for with undivided attention and affection and love, then that creates in the patient a phenomenon called limbic resonance. So the limbic brain of the healer and the limbic brain of the recipient, they start to resonate. That means same frequency. Just like these three were in the same frequency, even though they were playing different things. You know, you have tabla, you have sarod, and you have vocals. They're playing different things, but they're totally correlated. So that's resonance. And when there's resonance, it leads to something called limbic regulation. So the healer's brain starts to regulate the neural networks of the patient, and finally there's something called limbic revision. The neural networks actually rewire to create homeostasis or self-regulation or decrease inflammation. And that's the mechanism through which the healing response occurs emotionally. But there are other mechanisms, as I said, the molecules of emotion, and then there are other mechanisms which result in, as a result of the shift in mood from fight-flight response to reactive response to what we call intuitive, creative, visionary, and transcendent experiences. So it's a science by itself. But the science is not yet popular because it's much more powerful than, say, pharmaceuticals. And people ask, how do we make money out of this? But in fact, music is mathematical. Music is mathematical. Mathematics is the various algorithms that cause the entanglement of sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, imagination, creativity, transcendence.
Doctor, do you think that those who are educated or listen to Indian classical music or any other form are at some advantage when it comes to musical therapy and using it?
Well, right now there's a movement where there's fusion of Indian music with also classical Western music, but also classical popular pop music, as you call it. So I had the good fortune of being very close to George Harrison, and we traveled in India, and of course, that George introduced Ravi Shankar to the world, And last week in England, I happened to have the privilege of launching the Glastonbury Music Festival with a meditation, and then Elton John closed it. But then there was a ceremony in London with Paul McCartney, and Anushka was there. And the last time I met Anushka, she was 12 years old. And she's a good example of the fusion that is happening right now, as is Norah Jones and many others. And I have to say that George was a visionary in that he saw this before its time.
I'd like to open it up to those that are with us today. If anyone had any questions, you could bring the microphone down. Any questions? Oh, sorry, one second. Let me.
Once Dr. Chopra has spoken, wisdom lies in not speaking at all. But I resonate, I'm using his own terminology, I resonate completely with what he has said. In the context of music and mathematics, Dr. Chopra, I have a personal experience to narrate. I'd been struggling with a mathematical problem for a long time, and I was in the US for an extended period at Berkeley. And one day I came back to my room and I switched on Mozart's Symphony number 40. And I sat at my desk and began to look at the problem again. And I'm not saying that this applies only to me. I bet it's happened to a million people. I went into a sort of trance. And about 15, 20 minutes later, I knew I had the solution.
That's it.
Somehow it elevated things inside my mind, and I've been struggling for so long. But I realized, and later I read, that Mozart's music is particularly suited to somehow catalyze or accentuate mathematical thinking.
Mozart and Beethoven's Fifth have that reputation. Mozart and Tchaikovsky also. And for mood elevation, Vivaldi, these are well known. But you're right, Mozart evokes mathematical genius as well. And it was something that great mathematicians actually had access to. They were very fond of music, including Einstein. And there's a theorem in math, as you know, called Gödel's theorem, where the theorems are true, but they can't be proven. They just occur to the mathematician out of the blue. They don't know where they come from. And Ramanujan was the classic example of that. And when he was asked, where do you get your math from? He said, Saraswati. But as we know, Saraswati is not only math, she's music as well. She's the custodian of both math and music and wisdom and culture. So there's some deep truth to the fact that music is not a human creation. We download it from wherever.
That applies to maths also.
That applies to math.
Download that.
Yeah.
And the other connection between math and music, and I believe they're almost like two sides of the same coin, is that, I could write mathematical formulae, expressions, using Fourier terms, and then I could feed it into an electronic device and it would convert into music. And if I take music, and if I need to transmit it, so if Lata Mangeshkar sings in Bombay and then on, the long wave radio, it comes to me, it cannot happen until it is converted into Fourier coefficients. That's what that black box does. And then it reconverts it into music. So the two seem to be like two sides of the same coin.
They're exactly the same. One is left brain, one is right brain, and they're entangled. Human civilization the entire human history of human civilization began with language, and every child, first thing we teach is ABC, 1, 2, 3, right? You learn math, you start with that, and numbers, and then sounds. What is missing is music. So if our education paid as much attention to linguistic language and mathematical language, and then introduced musical language in the earlier years, that education would result in a totally different civilization. Also music, people use it to manipulate society. So when people go to war, martial music incites violence. Okay. Chanting, the word enchantment comes from the word to become one with God through chanting. Enchantment. On one, chant, chanting. Enchantment is to become one with the divine through chanting. Now we know that music and chanting and singing and humming, the vibrations particularly of the Samved, for example. Samved is the Veda for chanting, and of course there's so many other chants in the Atharva Ved and also in the Natha Shastras and so on. All these actually now we recognize also have an effect of stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. So the violent world is the sympathetic overdrive, which we all know as the fight, flight, the reactive response. But chanting, actually, and particularly mantra chanting, and also this kind of music, it actually stimulates branches of the vagus nerve that bring about self-regulation in different organs of the body. So that's another way that music could heal. The many ways music heals, through neuroplasticity, through the generation of molecules of emotion, through limbic resonance, through chanting, what we call shabda. It's all actually the same thing. It's vibration or fluctuation of consciousness as the symmetry of the universe breaks into space-time and causality. The theater of space-time and causality in which we are right now is a projection of that perfect symmetry. Whatever name you want to give it, singularity or ultimate reality.
My last intervention, Dr. Chopra, I don't want to monopolize you.
No, this is very enlightening.
But a couple of years ago, Banaras is my hometown, and I'm aware of its mystic, various auras that exist. And I came across a retired professor at Banaras who mentioned to me that in his childhood, at his own home, which used to be infested with snakes, he had witnessed someone who was well versed in the art of chanting the right mantras, which would draw the snakes out of the house towards his own cage.
Now, see, this is very interesting because snakes are deaf, you know that.
Yeah.
Okay, and yet they perceive these vibrations. So it's not necessary to hear music through the auditory channel alone. Different species have different ways of hearing the vibrations of the universe. So the bats, for example, their hearing is the echo of ultrasound, which is totally alien to us. When a honeybee comes from its hive to its grove, it does what they call a waggle dance. So it actually dances to some vibration that you and I cannot hear, but the other honeybees in the grove, just by looking at that dance and feeling the vibration, they know exactly which grove to go for that particular flavor of honey. So vibration and music, particularly, that induces this resonance, is the language of nature. It's very mysterious, actually. When you look at snakes, when you look at bees, when you look at bats, when you look at even bird migration or butterflies migration, it's very mysterious what they do. You know, you have these monarch butterflies that fly all the way from Massachusetts all across to California, go down the coast to some place in Mexico where the next generation breeds, and then they take the exact route back from Mexico to California all the way to Massachusetts, and the descendants of those butterflies land on the same twig of the same tree from where the ancestor came. And we have no idea what this resonance is in nature, because our species, what we call our five senses, is a very narrow band of perceptual activity that we access, and we call it objective reality. But you know, if you look at the visual spectrum that we have, it's between 300 and 800 nanometers. There are other species that can experience infrared, other species ultraviolet, other species ultrasound, and all these actually senses are entangled. So what we experience, as we call the physical world, with its 2 trillion galaxies, 700 sextillion stars, uncountable trillions of planets, is not even a nanometer of what is out there as the infinite source of creation. It's mind-boggling and it's incomprehensible. That's why, you know, Rumi said God's language is silence, everything else is poor translation, and probably math and music are the best translation. Ultimately, you have to give up.
Yeah, even Salmon, you know, they go deep into oceans, and then they have started from a single stream, then that river, and then the ocean, and then they return exactly to the same.
Same, yes. And that is, by the way, that is smell.
That's smell,
That is smell. The salmon has the memory of smell from where it came. But you see, in the deeper reality, smell, sound, sight, color, taste are the same fluctuation experienced differently. So these are called the tanmatras, you know, the subtle senses, where sound, sensation, image, flavor, and taste and smell come together. And there's something in the medical literature now called synesthesia. So some people, when they taste something, they hear music, or when they hear a music, they see equations, or they see equations and they hear the music, or they feel the taste, or they feel the smell. So these five senses that we have actually are the same fluctuation experienced in a different way. At least that's what the synesthetes are telling us. And these are very rare people, but they exist. And, you know, I know one woman who actually, she listens to music and she doesn't have to eat food because she experiences the flavor of all the foods just by listening to the different vibrations of music. Synesthesia, it's well known now.
Do you have any practical tips for us on how to incorporate into our daily lives the healing power of music? What can we be doing to...
I think ultimately the key is joy. If music creates joy, then it's right for you. It doesn't mean, you know, you can enjoy the Beatles as much as you can enjoy Mozart or Ravi Shankar or you know, your husband.
Nisschal Zaveri.
Yeah, Nisschal and his wonderful colleagues.
Wonderful.
We have with us someone who for last 25 years looks into audience research, who listens why Mr. L.V. Krishnan, CEO of the Time Media.
Dr. Chopra, you know, this is a world where we are entering into the metaverse, actually, okay? Where technology is starting to play a role in defining and shaping what audiences watch, what audiences consume, whether it's sound, video, or any of those aspects actually. Now, when you relate this to what you spoke about today and to what you've written in your book, do you see this as a distraction, or is it taking us to one higher level of understanding our own consciousness in a different way?
It's a great question. So, what we experience as everyday reality, this experience that we're having right now, this is a very species-specific experience. It's a human experience that you and I are having right now. And it is the projection of consciousness. So, in India, it's easy to speak about because we say this is Maya. Instantly, the word Maya is related to the word Mata, Matrika, Mother, music, matter, time, measurement are the same word. Music, Mata, Matrika, matter, mathematics, same word, Maya. So Maya is the projection of consciousness as this, and this human experience. So what we call everyday reality is not actually everyday reality. It is a very species-specific experience, and somehow the brain is involved. Our brain is involved. What Web3 is doing is, without actually consciously knowing this, we are already in a virtual reality. This is a collective dreamscape, and you and I, as body-mind, are fictional characters in that dreamscape. It's not real, okay? It's a dream. It's a lucid dream in a vivid now. You know, Wittgenstein, the German philosopher, said, we are asleep, our life is a dream, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we are dreaming. Buddha said the same thing. This lifetime of ours, as transient as autumn clouds, to watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain. And as we know, when he was dying, Ananda asked him, who are you? Are you a Messiah, God? He said, no, none of the above. He said, who are you? He said, I'm awake. Okay, so this thing that we are seeing as Web3 is the extension of the virtual reality we are already in. And you say, is this a human creation? I don't think so. Technology is actually part of the evolution of the cosmos in the same way as language was. You know, that's why in India, at least, we give credence to language and grammar and Panini and Saraswati and music and math, all as part of our cultural inheritance, understanding that this is part of the evolution of whatever the infinite singularity is that is emerging as species-specific experiences. So I believe that Web3 is actually an extension of the VR that we're already in. Now, that has huge implications. If you put a patient in an environment, a VR experience, that the person feels he's in the Himalayas, they'll get frostbite. If they have burns, their burns will get cured. If they have frostbite, you put them in a VR experience that gives them the experience of a desert, their frostbite will get better. If you take autistic children who don't have normal emotional expressions, but you give them a VR experience where they see in the Aaeena their own normal expressions, their neural networks will rewire. So I'm thinking in a few years, you go to see a doctor, They probably won't give you pharmaceuticals. They'll say, go take a VR session. You go to this room and you get a VR session for anorexia, for eating disorders, for autism, for inflammation, for frostbite, for heat stroke, for autoimmune illness, all through VR, because we are already in the VR. And this is part of our evolution. Is this divine or is this diabolical? It's both. It's Shiva, it's Brahma, it's Vishnu all at the same time. So you say, are there dangers to AI? Are there dangers to Web3? Sure. Are there benefits? Sure. Can we use this new technology to create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier and joyful world? Yes. Can we use it to destroy the world, cause our extinction? Yes. It has all the possibilities that consciousness has. So I think Web3 is inevitable. We can't stop it. No technology can ever be stopped. But then how we use it depends on our state of consciousness. We can heal the world, we can destroy it.
Any other questions?
Sir, that was loud. Extraordinary experience today hearing you. Not for the first time, I've heard you before. It's always been very interesting. I have a simple question, sir. How do you define reincarnation or rebirth?
Simple. Recycling. The universe is a big recycling plant. So energy recycles, information recycles, matter recycles, and consciousness recycles. Not only recycles, but it evolves. So every generation is the recycling of the past and also a little evolution, because it's not only a recycling, but it's an evolution into higher levels of creativity and evolution. So what recycles, the way we term it in our common language, is sanskara, vasana, and karma. So karma is the memory of the past and the interpretation of the past. Sanskara is the seed of memory, which creates vasana, the seed of desire, which then recycles as karma. So what we call a person is the recycling of basically information. And information is an interesting word. Information means to give rise to form. So, Einstein's equation took us only thus far, E is equal to mc squared. But wherever there's matter, there's energy. Wherever there's energy, there's information. And wherever there's information, there's consciousness. So what is recycling or reincarnating is consciousness. It cannot be denied, by the way. If you did not recycle, you would be the only exception. Even plastic recycles over, it takes a long time, but even plastic can recycle.
Hi. So, am I audible? Okay. So, you spoke about information, right? And basically, you spoke about simulations. So, essentially, my question was that if whatever we perceive, if this is a simulation and everybody has different perceptions on reality based on whatever their senses have been telling them, whatever they've perhaps chosen to infer from those senses, at some point, wouldn't this information come in conflict? At some point, whatever this world is, whatever we believe it is, doesn't that come in conflict with another person? Doesn't information by itself come into conflict? And how at that point, how do you explain that as an entanglement? If this is the world, and if, for example, I touch this is simply my brain processing this information that I'm touching this. What is to stop this from existing? If somebody comes and says this does not exist, but it still is there for me. Do you get what I'm talking about? The paradox of processing information. So how do you how do you reason with that? Like, you know?
So what we call the mind with its information is a socially and culturally programmed process. And that is very complex. So, your mind, my mind, is actually not an individual mind. We have no original thoughts, zero. Sometimes there's a breakthrough. Mozart, Einstein, the quantum mechanical pioneers, or, there's a breakthrough once in a while. But normally, what we call my mind is the cultural mind recycling through this body-mind apparatus. There's no original thought, ever. When I say blue, we all know what blue means. When I say red, we all know what red means. When I say hard, we all know hard. You touch that wall, okay? Let's say an alligator was touching that wall. Would it have the same hardness experience? Or a fly, or a butterfly, or a neutron, or a photon, would it have the same experience? The answer is no. What that hardness that you experience is a human perceptual activity in the human mind, and is a branch, one differentiated branch of an infinite consciousness that is processing through species-specific biological instruments that we call biological organisms into a species-specific experience. You cannot even imagine what the world looks like to an insect with 100 eyes. It's beyond your imagination. Yet, in mythology, we see all this. In Indian mythology, we see all these, demons, asuras, devatas, all these divine and diabolical beings, everything in between. Not only Indian mythology, the Egyptians, Greeks, all had the same. So all the conflicts in the world, which you were talking about just now, are actually ideological conflicts. All of them. They're all about, we were programmed into different ideas. Now, once you get rid of that programming, you can participate in the cultural milieu and at the same time realize that it's a projection of our cultural hypnosis. And when you go beyond these constructs, you actually have access to other realities. Now, if you want to say where do they exist in literature, they exist in our Puranas. Their stories are outrageous, Read the stories in the Mahabharata and Ramayana. You have every possible theme there. You have betrayal, you have incest, you have trust, you have glory, you have courage, you have fear. Every human experience is there. Okay? But when you deconstruct that experience and you read Patanjali's chapter on Vibhutis, where he talks dharana, dhyan, samadhi, he says when you do samadhi or dharana on any object, so you take that flower, okay? And you say, what is that flower? Well, as the word flower, it's an object. But before I can call it a flower, with that green color, that shape, that taste, that smell, before I can call it that, it's an experience. Before I call this a flower, a baby is looking at that flower. It has no idea that you call that a flower, or this a rose, or this a tree, or that a cloud, or that a rainbow, or that the galaxy. What is the baby experiencing? Sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. But primarily sensations, experiencing color. So what we call form is color. The difference between that carpet and my socks and my jeans and my hand is color. Without color, there's no shape. Without shape, there's no form. Now I give it a name. This combination of colors, shapes, and forms is called a hand. That's called a carpet. That's called a star. So as soon as you have language, you create construct. What is there prior to language is colors, shapes, forms, sounds, sensations, flavors, and fragrances, and then feelings that are evoked out of that, and images before language. That is ultimate reality. Now you say, okay, that's an experience. Where is that experience happening? Where is the experience of that flower happening? Some people will say it's in the eyes, but there's no experience in the eyes. You know, if the experience of this room was happening in my eyes are 2.5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters. They're 9 centimeters apart, approximately. By the time light gets into the retina is curved, it crosses over. So if you're seeing me in your eyes, you should see two of me about this size, upside down and curved. Not happening in your eyes. Then you say, it's happening in my brain. Well, your brain is 10 centimeters by 15 centimeters by 12 centimeters. How does this room fit inside your brain? How does the Milky Way galaxy fit inside your brain? So these are constructs we have created, scientific constructs. They help us create Web3 and extend the VR, but this is not reality. Okay, but our conflict is because we perceive reality differently, and we were programmed culturally, economically, religiously, whatever you call it, into a different confluence of constructs, and we fight about these constructs. If we transcended, if we did what Patanjali is saying, dhyan, dharana, samadhi, you can actually access what they call the siddhis and the riddhis. Now, he said something very interesting before he played the first rag. You said, this rag, when Pansen played, rain fell. Okay, now, the normal person would not believe that. You know, that he played this rag and it started to rain. So what nonsense, you know, but that's a riddhi. That's a siddhi. And that siddhi comes when you and nature become one. Okay, when the seer and the scenery become one, there's no subject-object split. You have access to all these so-called miraculous, non-local, dormant potentials, which Patanjali and the Shiva Sutras and Kashmir Shaivism and Vedanta, all these people have hinted. In Yoga Vasishta says infinite universes exist in the vast expanse of consciousness like motes of dust dancing in a beam of light. That's a metaphor from thousands of years, and today mathematicians are talking about infinite universes. So, you know, reality is too mind-boggling, and it unless you're a sage or a psychotic or a genius, you don't want to have anything to do with it.
I just had one more question, actually, I just want to ask. So when you were talking about, for example, how these peptides, serotonin and all, how they affect the mind and how we perceive things, and how music and math help with neuroplasticity, I wanted to ask you, what are your views on, for example, there's a new wave of psychedelic-assisted therapy, basically, with people taking these naturally occurring chemicals or whatever is out there.
Yeah, our foundation does research on the public awareness of psychedelics, particularly now with ayahuasca and even with LSD and other substances. And what these psychedelic substances do is they decrease the activity of a part of the brain called the default mode network. And that part of the brain is the neural correlate of our ego. So when that dissolves, people have an experience of the so-called matrix, and they have terminal lucidity, and they lose the fear of death. It's actually very astonishing what happens with these. And they're not addictive either. In fact, they help cure addiction.
Dr. Chopra, I have a question for you. It's more to do with our current reality. You've covered fascinating areas, and I think we're all very grateful for all that you've had to say, and we've learned a lot. We come from a tradition, a rich heritage, And this has been there for thousands of years, and India is well known for it. And yet, all this is known, and yet our education system, our medicine, autism, Alzheimer's, all these things are today's reality, and the illnesses are greater in number. So for a country like ours and our people, what do you think we need to do to bring that therapy of soul therapy and music back into a reality where we can solve these issues? It's so, our education system is completely devoid of it. How did we even get to this stage?
Yeah, it's very complex. We are victims of colonialism as much as most of the world is. That's why we say Greenwich Mean Time and not Bangladesh Mean Time or Delhi Mean Time. Everything that we do is an inheritance of a colonial system which was based on conquest and predation and violence. If you read the history of human civilization, it's a history of violence. What do you read? The Second World War, First World War, Battle of Panipat, Second Battle, Panipat, Third Battle. It's all that, starting with Mahabharata. It's all battle, battle, battle. So, and yet there were a group of luminaries in India, and they were few. You can count the rishis of the Upanishads. They said 100 plus rishis, but you count them, there are a few luminaries who gave this gift of fundamental reality to the world. And we are proud of that, but we don't follow it. We just say, when I was growing up, when I used to tell my grandmother, I used to say, "Ye to Germans ne sab hamare se liya, Max Muller, this, that." It is all written in our Vedas. But yes, it is written, but it's not written in all the Vedas. It's in the Upanishads. And the Upanishads is a contribution of a few luminaries. We have a romantic idea that all of India was spiritual. But no, India is like any other country. Greeks, we have a romantic idea about Greeks. Parmenides, Pythagoras, Hermes Megistus, Socrates, Plato. Few people. While that was going on, there was also slavery, there was also sexism, there was also violence, there was also sacrifices of humans, etc. So we cannot judge a culture by its luminaries, and yet those luminaries gave us a gift that we have lost. We recycle their knowledge by words. This is what I'm doing. But we don't live it. If we actually lived it, India could help create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier and joyful world. But then it has to be an experience, not just a theology or a philosophy. No system of thought, philosophy, religion, science, theology can help us. You have to go into the actual experience. And music is an experience. And therefore, I think the only hope, if there is one, is what Mahatma Gandhi said: if you can be the change you want to see in the world, and there's a critical mass of people effecting that change, there's no hope. You're sleepwalking to extinction.
On a very positive note.
Can I just, when you mentioned Pythagoras, you will be interested to learn, Dr. Chopra. I've gone extensively into his life, and I have now a fair amount of evidence, most importantly from one of his principal disciples, Orpheus, who gave a bunch of so-called Florida lectures where he mentions clearly that Pythagoras came to India.
Yes.
And Voltaire also writes the same, that there is no doubt he came to India to learn from the Brahmins on the banks of the Ganga.
I 100% agree with you. This is not common language, but even the medicine of the ancient Greeks was brought back to Greece by Alexander the Great from India. So the original medicine of the Greeks has connections to India as a result of Alexander the Great. We call him the Great, but he was a gangster. Yes, sir.
You have traveled a lot because you have been across the world. You have seen medical systems of different countries. Have you ever got to experience solutions where there are just holistic treatments happening, where at one place treatment systems are combined with other technologies of Ayurveda, of hypnotherapy, and the modern medical system along with the traditional one? Are there centers where combination of therapies are happening, and are people taking advantage of such?
There's an evolution, I would say. So first it was called alternative medicine. Now it's called integrative medicine. And actually in the United States now, almost every medical school gives an option to medical students to take an elective where they can learn regular, what we call Western medicine, but they can also learn Ayurveda, they can also learn Chinese medicine. They can learn indigenous medicine. I have appointments at Mount Sinai and University of California, Central Florida, where these are departments of integrative medicine. And it's happening in many other parts of the world, but I think more than any other place it's happening in the United States. When I went to the United States in 1970, there was one yoga studio in New York. Now there are 5 yoga studios in every block of New York. And meditation, mindfulness, it's a buzzword. If you're not doing it, you're not part of the trend anymore. So, and the research, on epigenetics and genetics and what we call inflammation, and the linkage of inflammation to body, mind, emotions, and environment is something that people are now paying a lot of attention to in the United States. In England, it's still not there. In India, I think there's a deep divide between, the academics and the Ayurvedic doctors, and unfortunately, Ayurveda was not treated with respect even by Indian doctors, and as a result, Ayurveda also, they became more oriented towards prescriptions. Instead of giving you a tranquilizer, they give you a herb. But that's not what Ayurveda is a life science. It's everything to do with daily routine, with seasonal routine, with rituals, with all kinds of things that I would say are qualia medicine, not quantitative medicine, but qualitative medicine and integrative medicine. And I think that needs to be an integration. I had the good fortune of meeting the new director of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, where I went to medical school. And they're keen now to create a department. Oh. I had the good fortune to meet this very progressive director, and he is saying that we should bring about this integration. And so with visionaries, young directors like him, I think there is hope.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap things up.
Thank you.
But it was a true honor. Thank you for your words. Thank you.